The day your wife files for divorce is the day you realize nobody likes a mechanic who can't fix his own marriage. I found the hotel receipt while fixing our washing machine. 23 years of marriage, and Nessa still stuffed random papers in her pockets like a teenager. The Riverfront Motel, 2 nights last month, cash payment. She'd told me she was at a legal conference in Indianapolis those exact dates. My name is Wes Farrow, and I've been rebuilding engines longer than I've been rebuilding trust. Turns out, trust is harder to repair than a blown gasket. "Dad, you're making that face again," Paige announced, storming into the laundry room with her phone glued to her ear. My 19-year-old daughter had perfected the art of looking permanently annoyed. "Mom says you've been acting weird all week." "Weird how?" I asked, pocketing the receipt. "Like, suspicious weird. She thinks you're going through her stuff." Smart woman, my wife. Too smart for her own good. "Just fixing the washer," I said. "Your mother's been complaining about the spin cycle." Paige rolled her eyes and disappeared back upstairs, probably to update her social media followers about her dysfunctional family. The kid documented everything online these days, made me wonder what else she'd been sharing about our home life. That evening, Nessa came home late from her law firm. She specialized in family law, which struck me as ironic, considering how little attention she paid to our own family lately. Her hair was different, styled in a way that screamed expensive salon. Her clothes looked crisp despite supposedly working a 12-hour day. "How was the conference last month?" I asked during dinner, watching her reaction carefully. She didn't miss a beat. "Boring. Same old continuing education requirements. You know how these things are." I didn't know how these things were, actually. I'd never been to a legal conference in my life, but I knew how lies sounded, and this one had a particular ring to it. After dinner, I drove to the Rusty Glove boxing gym. Jax Ramsey, the owner and my best friend since high school, was closing up for the night. The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and honest work. Everything my life used to be. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Jax said, wiping down the heavy bag. "Worse, think my wife's cheating." Jax stopped wiping. "What makes you say that?" I showed him the receipt. He studied it with the same intensity he used to analyze opponents in the ring. "Riverfront Motel, huh? That place is a dump. Why would she go there?" "That's what I'm wondering." "You want my advice? Follow her. See what she's really up to." "That's probably illegal." "So is adultery in some states." Jax had a point. My wife was a lawyer who specialized in destroying marriages for a living. If she was planning to destroy ours, I needed to know what I was up against. The next week, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Nessa had always worked late, but lately, her schedule had become unpredictable. She'd leave for lunch and return 3 hours later. She'd take phone calls in the other room. She'd shower immediately after coming home, even on days when she claimed to have been sitting in depositions all afternoon. Then I noticed her car. Nessa drove a silver SUV that she kept spotless. But lately, there were coffee cups in the console that weren't from her usual place. Receipts from restaurants across town. Parking stubs from the courthouse district where her firm wasn't located. I started making mental notes. Tuesday, she said she had a client dinner but came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Thursday, she claimed to be working late, but her car wasn't in the firm's parking lot when I drove by at 9 p.m. Friday, she received a text that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Dad, you're being creepy," Paige informed me over breakfast. "Mom says you've been asking weird questions." "What kind of weird questions?" "Like, where she goes and who she talks to. She thinks you're having a midlife crisis." Maybe I was. Maybe discovering your wife's secret life qualified as a crisis, but I preferred to think of it as finally paying attention. That weekend, Nessa announced she had to work Saturday afternoon. Emergency client situation. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that looked more like a date than a legal consultation. When she left, I waited 10 minutes and followed. She didn't go to her office. She didn't go to the courthouse. She drove straight to the Riverfront Motel and parked next to a black luxury sedan I didn't recognize. I sat in my truck across the street, feeling like a private investigator in a bad movie. 20 minutes later, a man emerged from room 12. Tall, well-dressed, probably my age but better preserved. He looked around carefully before approaching Nessa's car. She got out and they embraced like people who'd been doing this for a while. Gavin Alcott. I recognized him now. Partner at Nessa's law firm. I'd met him at a few office parties over the years. Smug guy with perfect teeth and a handshake that lasted too long. Married to some socialite type who organized charity events. They disappeared into the motel room together. I sat there for 2 hours, alternating between rage and disbelief. My wife of 23 years was having an affair with her business partner. In the cheapest motel in town. The irony wasn't lost on me. She could afford better accommodations, but maybe the seediness was part of the appeal. When they finally emerged, I was ready. I'd spent the waiting time planning my next move. As Gavin walked to his car, I approached with a socket wrench in my hand. His sedan was beautiful. German engineering, leather interior, probably cost more than I made in 2 years. It would be a shame if something happened to it. I carved a shallow line along the passenger side, just deep enough to require professional repair. Then I left a note under his windshield wiper. Hope you're tipping housekeeping. Nessa was still in the motel room, probably freshening up. I was back in my truck before she came outside. That night, she acted normal. Asked about my day, mentioned her difficult client, complained about the long hours. I played along, but something had shifted inside me. The man who trusted his wife was gone. In his place was someone harder, more calculating, someone who understood that marriage was just another kind of contract, and contracts could be broken. Monday morning, my phone rang at the shop. We need to talk, Nessa said. Her voice was different, colder. About what? About your little visit to the motel Saturday. Gavin's car was vandalized. There are security cameras in that parking lot, Wes. So much for being clever. But if she wanted to play hardball, I was ready. Interesting that you know about Gavin's car, I said, since you were supposed to be meeting with a client. The line went quiet for a long moment. Come home, she said finally. We're going to settle this like adults. When I got home, Nessa was waiting in the living room with a manila envelope and the expression she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. Sit down, she said. I remained standing. After 23 years of marriage, I knew when my wife was about to deliver bad news. Her posture was too straight, her voice too controlled. I filed for divorce, she announced, sliding the envelope across the coffee table. The papers were served this morning. I stared at the envelope without touching it. That was fast. I've been thinking about this for months, Wes. We've grown apart. We want different things. This marriage isn't working anymore. Funny how you came to that conclusion right after I discovered your affair. Her lawyer mask slipped slightly. I don't know what you think you saw. I saw you and Gavin Alcott at the Riverfront Motel. I saw you embrace him like lovers. I saw you disappear into a room together for 2 hours. Nessa's composure cracked completely. You followed me? You spied on me? I investigated suspicious behavior. You lied about where you were going. You lied about who you were meeting. You've been lying for months. This is exactly why our marriage is over, she snapped. You're controlling, paranoid, and you have no respect for my privacy or my career. I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. Your career? Is that what you call sleeping with your business partner? Gavin and I have a professional relationship that you're too small-minded to understand. We work closely together. We discuss cases. Sometimes that requires meeting outside the office. In a motel room? We needed privacy for sensitive client matters. The woman was good, I'd give her that. She could make adultery sound like legal strategy, but I'd been married to her long enough to know when she was constructing a defense instead of telling the truth. I picked up the envelope and scanned the divorce papers. She was asking for everything: the house, half my business, spousal support, and primary custody of Paige, despite our daughter being 19 and technically an adult. "This is aggressive, even for you," I said. "I'm protecting my interests. You've already demonstrated that you're unstable. The vandalism, the stalking behavior, the paranoid accusations. I need to ensure my safety and financial security." "Your safety?" I scratched a car. "You damaged someone else's property because you couldn't control your emotions. That's concerning behavior, Wes." I studied my wife's face, looking for traces of the woman I'd married. She'd been softer then, more genuine. Law school had sharpened her edges, and years of practicing family law had turned her cynical. But this version of Nessa was someone I barely recognized. Cold, calculating, and completely ruthless. "Where's Paige?" I asked. "Upstairs. She knows about the divorce. She's upset, but she understands that this is for the best." "Does she know about Gavin?" "There's nothing to know about Gavin. And if you try to poison our daughter against me with your paranoid theories, I'll make sure the court knows about your mental instability." I set the papers down carefully. "You've thought this through." "I'm a lawyer, Wes. I think everything through." That evening, I went back to the Rusty Glove. Jax took one look at my face and handed me a beer without being asked. "She served you," he said. It wasn't a question. "This morning. Wants everything." "What are you going to do?" "Fight back. You need a lawyer." "I need information. She's been planning this for months, Jax. The affair, the divorce, the financial grab. She's been setting me up." "So what's your move?" I took a long drink of beer and considered my options. Nessa was a family law attorney with connections throughout the local legal community. She knew the judges, the clerks, the other lawyers. She had home field advantage in every possible way. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated me. "I'm going to document everything," I said. "The affair, the lies, the financial manipulation. I'm going to build a case that destroys her credibility." "That's dangerous territory, brother. She knows how the system works." "Then I'll have to learn." Over the next week, I became a student of my wife's routine. I noted when she left, when she returned, who she called, where she went. I started checking our credit card statements and bank records. I looked up property records and business filings. I researched Gavin Alcott's background, his marriage, his financial situation. What I found was interesting. Gavin was married to Jolene Alcott, daughter of a prominent local family with old money and older connections. Their marriage had been featured in the society pages 8 years ago. Big wedding, expensive reception, all the right people in attendance. But recently, there had been cracks in their perfect facade. Gavin had been spotted at various social events without his wife. Jolene had been photographed at charity functions looking strained and unhappy. There were rumors of financial problems, though nothing concrete. I also discovered that Nessa and Gavin had been working together on several high-profile divorce cases over the past year. Cases that had generated significant fees for their firm. Cases that required extensive collaboration and private meetings. The pattern was becoming clear. The affair wasn't just personal, it was professional. They were using their relationship to build their careers and their bank accounts. But the most interesting discovery came when I checked our home computer's browser history. Nessa had been researching divorce law in our state, specifically the grounds for expedited proceedings and asset division in cases involving business ownership. She'd been planning this for at least 6 months. Thursday evening, she came home with news. "I'm taking Paige out for dinner," she announced. "We need to discuss her living arrangements after the divorce." "She's 19, Nessa. She can make her own decisions about where to live. She's still in college. She needs stability and support, things you're not capable of providing right now." "Because I discovered your affair?" Because you're having a breakdown, the paranoia, the accusations, the property damage. Paige is scared of you, Wes. That hit harder than I expected. My daughter was scared of me? Or was Nessa manipulating her the same way she was manipulating the divorce proceedings? After they left, I searched Nessa's home office. I wasn't proud of it, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I found copies of our financial records, business valuations, and a timeline of my recent behavior that painted me as increasingly unstable and potentially dangerous. She was building a case against me, documenting everything that could be used to support her claims of emotional neglect and mental instability. The woman was thorough, I'd give her that. But she'd made another mistake. Hidden in her desk drawer, I found a burner phone. The text messages were revealing. Dozens of exchanges with Gavin over the past 4 months. Some were about work, but many were personal, intimate, and some were about me. W is getting suspicious. Need to accelerate timeline. Talk to P about living arrangements. She's on board. Meeting with financial planner tomorrow. Almost ready to file. They'd been planning this together. Every detail, every move, every manipulation. Nessa wasn't just having an affair, she was conducting a coordinated campaign to destroy my life and take everything I'd worked for. I photographed every message, every document, every piece of evidence I could find. If my wife wanted to play lawyer, I'd give her a case she'd never forget. Friday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Farrow, this is Jolene Alcott. I think we need to talk. Jolene Alcott suggested we meet at a coffee shop downtown, away from prying eyes and familiar faces. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could watch the entrance. Old habits from my boxing days, always know who's coming and going. She walked in exactly on time, and I understood immediately why Gavin had married her. Jolene was elegant in a way that money couldn't buy, with the kind of understated confidence that came from generations of privilege. But there was something else in her expression, a hardness that suggested she hadn't lived a sheltered life despite her advantages. Mr. Farrow, she said, extending a manicured hand, thank you for meeting me. Call me Wes, and thank you for reaching out. She ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. I know about my husband's affair with your wife. How long have you known? Longer than you have, I suspect. Gavin isn't as clever as he thinks he is. He leaves evidence everywhere, credit card receipts, phone records, changes in behavior. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. Why didn't you confront him? Because I wanted to understand the full scope of their relationship first. This isn't just an affair, Mr. Farrow. It's a business partnership with benefits. She reached into her purse and withdrew a manila folder. My investigator has been thorough. The folder contained photographs, financial records, and a timeline that made my amateur detective work look pathetic by comparison. Pictures of Nessa and Gavin at restaurants, hotels, and business meetings that weren't on either of their official calendars. Bank records showing unusual cash withdrawals that corresponded to their meeting dates. Phone logs documenting hundreds of calls and text messages over the past 8 months. They've been planning something big, Jolene continued. Not just your divorce, but a restructuring of the law firm. Gavin has been positioning himself to buy out the senior partners. Your wife has been helping him identify which clients and cases to target. Why are you telling me this? Because I want them both destroyed. Professionally, financially, and socially. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were arctic. This wasn't a woman scorned. This was a strategist planning a war. What do you propose? I asked. Mutual cooperation. I have resources you need, money, connections, and professional investigators. You have something I need. Which is? Credibility. I'm the wealthy wife seeking revenge. You're the working-class husband who's been betrayed. The narrative works better with both of us involved. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. but Jolene Alcott struck me as someone who didn't waste time on lies when the truth was more effective. "What's your endgame?" I asked. "I want Gavin's reputation ruined and his career ended. I want your wife disbarred for professional misconduct. I want their affair exposed in the most public, humiliating way possible." That's a lot of destruction. They've earned it. Over the next hour, Jolene laid out a plan that was both elegant and ruthless. Her private investigator had documented enough evidence to prove the affair and its connection to their professional activities. But the key was timing and presentation. "Your wife filed for divorce to protect herself," Jolene explained. "She's trying to paint you as unstable while positioning herself as the victim. We need to flip that narrative." "How?" "By letting her think she's winning, right up until the moment we destroy her in court." The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. We would allow the divorce proceedings to move forward normally while gathering additional evidence. Jolene's investigator would continue documenting the affair while I focused on building a case for Nessa's professional misconduct. Then, at the crucial moment during the divorce hearing, we would spring our trap. "The judge will have to consider the evidence," Jolene said. "Adultery affects asset division, and professional misconduct affects credibility. Your wife won't be able to claim the moral high ground when she's been exposed as a cheating lawyer who's been using her affair to advance her career." "What about Paige? Your daughter?" "She's been turned against me. Nessa's convinced her that I'm the problem. Children are resilient. When the truth comes out, she'll understand who was really protecting the family and who was destroying it." I wanted to believe that, but Paige had always been closer to her mother. Nessa was sophisticated, successful, and everything a young woman might aspire to become. I was just a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a high school education. "There's something else," Jolene said, lowering her voice. "I think they're planning to leave town together after your divorce is finalized." "What makes you say that?" "Gavin has been liquidating assets and transferring money to offshore accounts. He's also been in contact with law firms in other states. I think they're planning to start fresh somewhere else, using the money they've stolen from your marriage and my family." That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Why settle for destroying one marriage when you could profit from destroying two? "I need time to think about this," I said. "Don't take too long. They're moving fast and we need to stay ahead of them." That evening, I sat in my garage, surrounded by the tools and machinery that had defined my working life. Everything was organized, purposeful, and honest. You couldn't lie to an engine. It either ran or it didn't. Problems had solutions, and hard work produced results. My marriage had been different. Messier, more complicated, built on assumptions and compromises that I'd never fully understood. But I'd tried to be a good husband, a good father, a good provider. Apparently, that wasn't enough. Nessa came home late, as usual. She barely acknowledged me, heading straight upstairs to shower and change clothes. When she came back down, she was wearing expensive lingerie under a silk robe, the kind of outfit she used to wear for me but hadn't in months. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Just getting comfortable. It's been a long day." But she was lying again. The lingerie, the perfume, the careful attention to her appearance. She was getting ready for someone else. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Meeting at usual place in 1 hour. Can't wait to see you." The message wasn't for me. It was from Gavin's phone to Nessa's, but somehow it had been forwarded to my number. Jolene's investigator was more thorough than I'd realized. I watched my wife gather her purse and keys, preparing to leave for another secret meeting with her lover. She was confident, almost casual about it. She thought she'd won already. "Nessa," I said as she reached for the door. "What?" "I know you're meeting Gavin tonight." She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know about all the meetings. The motel, the restaurants, the business trips that weren't business trips. I know about the money you've been hiding and the plans you've been making." She turned to face me, and for the first time since this started, I saw fear in her eyes. "You're paranoid, Wes. You're seeing things that aren't there." "Am I? Then explain this." I showed her the text message. Her face went pale, then flushed red with anger. "You hacked my phone?" "I didn't have to. Your boyfriend isn't as careful as he thinks he is. This is harassment. I could have you arrested." "For what? Receiving text messages? Good luck explaining that to the police." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her lawyer brain working, calculating options and strategies. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "The truth. All of it." "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll see you in court, and I'll bring evidence." Nessa set down her purse and sat on the couch. For the first time in months, she looked vulnerable. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she said quietly. Nessa's confession came in pieces, like a puzzle she was reluctant to complete. She sat on our couch, the same couch where we'd watched movies, discussed Paige's future, and planned our retirement, and systematically dismantled 23 years of marriage. "It started as work," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Gavin and I were collaborating on the Henderson divorce case. High profile, lots of money involved. We were working late nights, weekends, spending more time together than with our own families." "When did it become personal?" 6 months ago, maybe 7. We were celebrating a big win, had a few drinks, and things just happened." I'd heard this story before, from dozens of clients whose marriages had imploded. The cliché was almost insulting: successful professionals who couldn't keep their personal and professional lives separate. "And you decided to leave me for him?" "I decided to leave you for me," she corrected. "Gavin just made me realize what I was missing." Which was ambition, success, someone who understood my career and respected my intelligence. "I always respected your intelligence. You tolerated it. There's a difference." She was rewriting history, casting our marriage as a prison she'd finally escaped. But I remembered the early years differently. I remembered a woman who'd been grateful for stability, who'd valued my steady income while she built her practice, who'd seemed happy with our modest life in Grainport. "What about Paige?" "Paige will be fine. She's an adult, Wes. She doesn't need us to stay married for her sake. She needs her family intact. She needs parents who are happy. I haven't been happy in this marriage for years." The words stung because they contained enough truth to be believable. We had grown apart. We had stopped communicating effectively. We had settled into a routine that prioritized stability over passion. But we'd also built something together. A home, a family, a shared history that couldn't be easily replaced or replicated. "So you and Gavin are planning a future together?" She hesitated. "We're exploring possibilities." "Including leaving Grainport?" Her head snapped up. "How did you—" "I know about the offshore accounts, the job applications in other states, the asset liquidation." For the first time, Nessa looked genuinely rattled. "You've been busy. I've been thorough, just like you taught me." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd lived for 15 years. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Wes. The legal community here is small, conservative, and judgmental. If this affair becomes public knowledge, it could destroy my career. Maybe you should have thought of that before sleeping with your business partner. Maybe I should have, but it's too late for regrets now." "Is it? You could end the affair, work on our marriage, try to rebuild what we had." She turned back to me, and her expression was almost pitying. "What we had wasn't enough, Wes. It was never enough." The next morning, I called Jolene and told her I was ready to move forward with her plan. We met at her attorney's office, a downtown firm that specialized in high-stakes litigation. The lawyer, Margaret Chen, was a sharp woman in her 50s who listened to our story with professional detachment. "You have enough evidence to prove adultery," she said after reviewing Jolene's files. But proving professional misconduct will be more challenging. What do we need? Jolene asked. Documentation that they used their personal relationship to gain unfair advantage in legal proceedings. Evidence that they shared confidential client information. Proof that they violated their professional obligations. I can get that, I said. Both women looked at me skeptically. How? Margaret asked. Nessa keeps copies of everything at home. Case files, client communications, financial records. She's always been paranoid about losing important documents. That would be illegal search and seizure, Margaret warned. Not if I'm searching my own home for my own property, I replied. Technically correct, but ethically questionable. So is sleeping with your business partner while married to someone else? Margaret smiled slightly. I like him, she told Jolene. Over the next week, I became a spy in my own home. While Nessa was at work or meeting with Gavin, I photographed documents, copied computer files, and built a comprehensive picture of their professional relationship. What I found was worse than I'd expected. They hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been using their relationship to manipulate legal proceedings. They'd shared confidential information about opposing clients, coordinated strategies that benefited their firm at the expense of their professional obligations, and used their combined influence to pressure judges and other attorneys. The Henderson case that had brought them together was particularly egregious. They'd convinced their client to accept a settlement that was far below market value, then use their knowledge of the opposing party's financial situation to make personal investments that profited from the outcome. They weren't just cheating spouses, they were corrupt lawyers who'd been using their affair to commit professional fraud. But the most damaging evidence came from Nessa's personal files. She'd been documenting our marriage for months, building a case that portrayed me as emotionally abusive, financially controlling, and potentially dangerous. Every argument, every disagreement, every moment of frustration had been twisted into evidence of my unfitness as a husband and father. She'd even been coaching Paige to support her version of events, feeding our daughter a narrative that cast me as the villain in our family's story. The betrayal was complete. My wife hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation and my relationship with my daughter while building a legal case that would leave me with nothing. Thursday evening, everything came to a head. I was in the garage when Paige came home from college, crying and upset about something. I could hear her talking to Nessa in the kitchen, their voices raised in what sounded like an argument. I don't want to choose sides, Paige was saying. You're not choosing sides, honey. You're protecting yourself from a father who's becoming increasingly unstable. He's not unstable, Mom. He's hurt. There's a difference. Is there? He's been following me, going through my things, making accusations. Because you've been lying to him. I've seen the receipts, Mom. I've heard the phone calls. I know about Gavin. The kitchen went quiet. I moved closer to the door, straining to hear. What exactly do you know? Nessa asked, her voice carefully controlled. I know you've been meeting him at hotels. I know you've been planning to leave Dad. I know you've been coaching me to say bad things about him for your divorce case. I've been trying to protect you. From what? From Dad? He's never hurt me, Mom. He's never hurt anyone. But you're destroying our family, and you're trying to make me help you do it. Paige, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that you're having an affair and trying to blame Dad for it. I understand that you're lying to everyone, including me. I heard footsteps, then the front door slamming. Through the window, I watched Paige drive away in her car, leaving Nessa alone in the kitchen. When I went inside, my wife was sitting at the table with her head in her hands. She knows, Nessa said without looking up. She's known for weeks. She just didn't want to believe it. This is going to destroy her. You're going to destroy her, just like you've destroyed everything else. Nessa looked up, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. I never wanted it to happen this way. But you wanted it to happen. Yes, I wanted out of this marriage. Out of this life, out of this town. I wanted something better. And you found it with Gavin? I thought I did. Thought? She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, reassembling her professional composure. It doesn't matter now. The divorce is proceeding. The papers are filed. There's no going back. You're right about that. She looked at me curiously. What do you mean? I mean, there's no going back. For any of us. The next morning, I received a call from Margaret Chen. It's time, she said. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Are you ready? I looked around my garage at the tools and machinery that represented everything I'd built with honest work and dedication. Then I thought about the evidence we'd gathered, the case we'd built, and the justice we were about to deliver. I'm ready. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical March weather in Grainport. I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to Paige's high school graduation, and drove to the courthouse with a manila folder full of evidence that would change everything. Jolene was waiting outside the courtroom, elegant in a navy dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Margaret Chen stood beside her, reviewing notes and looking like a general preparing for battle. How are you feeling? Jolene asked. Like I'm about to watch my life explode, I admitted. Sometimes destruction is necessary before rebuilding can begin. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Nessa sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney Thomas Brennan, a silver-haired man with a reputation for aggressive tactics in family court. Nessa had dressed carefully for the hearing, conservative suit, minimal makeup, an overall appearance designed to convey competence and victimization. She didn't look at me when I entered, but I saw her shoulders tense. Gavin was nowhere to be seen, which wasn't surprising. He had no official role in the proceedings and probably wanted to avoid being connected to the case publicly. Judge Patricia Berryman entered precisely at 9 a.m. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been handling family court cases for 20 years. I'd heard she had little patience for games or manipulation. This is the matter of Farrow versus Farrow, she announced. Dissolution of marriage. Mrs. Farrow, you're the petitioner? Yes, Your Honor, Nessa replied, standing briefly. Mr. Farrow, you're representing yourself? No, Your Honor, Margaret Chen will be representing me. Judge Berryman looked surprised. Margaret Chen's firm didn't usually handle middle-class divorce cases. But she made a note and continued. Mrs. Farrow, please present your case. Thomas Brennan stood and launched into a well-rehearsed presentation. Nessa was a successful attorney who'd been emotionally neglected by her husband for years. I was controlling, suspicious, and increasingly unstable. The marriage was irretrievably broken, and Nessa deserved a fair division of assets plus spousal support to maintain her standard of living. He presented evidence of my recent behavior, the car vandalism, the surveillance, the paranoid accusations about her professional activities. He called it a pattern of escalating harassment that made Nessa fear for her safety. My client simply wants to end this marriage with dignity and move forward with her life, Brennan concluded. It was a solid presentation, professionally delivered and supported by carefully selected evidence. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been convinced. Mr. Farrow's response? Judge Berryman asked. Margaret Chen stood slowly, deliberately. Your Honor, we have a different perspective on this marriage and its dissolution. She began by acknowledging the breakdown of the marriage but challenging the narrative of causation. Rather than emotional neglect leading to separation, she suggested that infidelity had led to deception, which had led to the breakdown of trust and communication. We believe the evidence will show that Mrs. Farrow has been engaged in an extramarital affair for approximately 8 months, Margaret said. Furthermore, this affair has been conducted in conjunction with professional activities that may constitute ethical violations. Brennan objected immediately. Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated accusations designed to deflect attention from my client's legitimate grievances. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Judge Berryman asked Margaret. We do, Your Honor. Extensive evidence. Then present it. Margaret began with the financial records, credit card receipts, bank withdrawals, and hotel charges that corresponded to dates when Nessa claimed to be working late or attending conferences. She presented phone records showing hundreds of calls and text messages between Nessa and Gavin Alcott outside normal business hours. This establishes a pattern of deception regarding Mrs. Farrow's activities and whereabouts, Margaret explained. Brennan continued objecting, but Judge Berryman seemed interested in the evidence. She asked pointed questions about the timeline and frequency of the communications. Then Margaret presented the photographs. Nessa and Gavin entering and leaving the Riverfront Motel together. Nessa and Gavin at restaurants across town, holding hands and behaving intimately. Nessa and Gavin in Gavin's car, embracing in parking lots. The courtroom was completely quiet. I watched Nessa's face as the evidence mounted. She maintained her composure, but I could see the tension in her posture, the slight tremor in her hands. Your Honor, Brennan said during a brief recess, even if these allegations are true, adultery is not grounds for punitive asset division in this state. The marriage is still irretrievably broken regardless of the cause. That's correct, Judge Berryman agreed. However, credibility is always relevant in family court proceedings. When we reconvened, Margaret presented the most damaging evidence, the professional misconduct. She showed how Nessa and Gavin had used their personal relationship to share confidential client information, coordinate legal strategies that violated their professional obligations, and profit from insider knowledge of their opponents' strategies. This isn't just an affair, Your Honor, Margaret said. This is a pattern of professional corruption that calls into question Mrs. Farrow's fitness to practice law and her credibility as a witness in these proceedings. Brennan was on his feet immediately. Objection! These allegations are completely outside the scope of this divorce proceeding. This is character assassination, not legal argument. Your Honor, Margaret replied calmly, Mrs. Farrow has based her case on claims of emotional neglect and her husband's allegedly unstable behavior. Her own behavior and credibility are absolutely relevant to these proceedings. Judge Berryman considered this for a long moment. I'll allow the evidence, but I want to see clear documentation, not speculation. Margaret presented the copied files, the shared client information, and the coordinated strategies that had benefited Nessa and Gavin's firm at the expense of their professional obligations. She showed how they'd manipulated the Henderson case and several others, using their affair to gain unfair advantages. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Even Brennan seemed stunned by the scope of the misconduct. But the real bombshell came when Margaret called her final witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Jolene Alcott to testify. The courtroom door opened, and Jolene walked in with the confidence of someone who owned the room. She was sworn in and took the witness stand with perfect composure. Mrs. Alcott, please state your relationship to this case, Margaret began. I'm married to Gavin Alcott, Mrs. Farrow's business partner and lover. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Nessa's face went white, and Brennan looked like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. How long have you been aware of their affair? Margaret asked. Approximately 4 months. I hired a private investigator when I became suspicious of my husband's behavior. And what did your investigation reveal? Jolene's testimony was devastating. She presented evidence that corroborated everything Margaret had already shown, but from a different perspective. She had financial records, photographs, recorded phone conversations, and documented proof of the professional misconduct. But the most damaging revelation came at the end of her testimony. Mrs. Alcott, are you aware of any plans your husband and Mrs. Farrow have made regarding their future? Yes, They've been planning to leave Grainport together after both divorces are finalized. My husband has been liquidating assets and transferring money to accounts that Mrs. Farrow can access. They've been applying for positions with law firms in other states. Do you have documentation of these activities? I do. Jolene presented bank records, job applications, and email communications that showed Nessa and Gavin had been planning their escape for months. They'd been systematically looting both marriages to fund their new life together. When Jolene finished her testimony, the courtroom was completely silent. Judge Berryman looked at the evidence spread across her bench, then at Nessa, who was staring at her hands. Mrs. Farrow, the judge said, do you wish to respond to this testimony? Nessa stood slowly. For a moment I thought she might confess, might finally tell the truth about what she'd done and why she'd done it. Instead, she said, Your Honor, I respectfully request a recess to consult with my attorney. Denied. Please respond to the evidence presented. Nessa looked at Brennan, who shook his head slightly. There was no defense for what had been revealed, no legal strategy that could overcome the mountain of evidence against her. Your Honor, Nessa said quietly, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The courtroom erupted. Judge Berryman banged her gavel and called for order, but the damage was done. By invoking the Fifth Amendment in a civil proceeding, Nessa had essentially admitted that her actions might have been criminal. Very well, Judge Berryman said when order was restored. Based on the evidence presented and Mrs. Farrow's refusal to respond, I'm prepared to rule on the dissolution of this marriage. She awarded me the house, the business, and the majority of our joint assets. She denied Nessa's request for spousal support and ordered her to pay my legal fees. She also recommended that the State Bar Association investigate the professional misconduct allegations. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the look on Nessa's face when she realized that her carefully constructed plan had collapsed completely. She'd gambled everything on a strategy that depended on my ignorance and passivity, and she'd lost. As we left the courtroom, Jolene touched my arm. It's not over, she said quietly. The Bar Association investigation will take months. The criminal charges could take years, but today was a good start. I looked back at Nessa, who was sitting alone at the plaintiff's table while Brennan packed his briefcase. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of her secrets and the collapse of her plans. What happens now? I asked. Now we go home and rebuild our lives, the honest way. That evening, Paige came to see me. She'd been in the courtroom for the hearing, sitting in the back where I couldn't see her. She looked older somehow, aged by the revelations about her mother's behavior. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, hugging me tightly. I should have believed you from the beginning. You were protecting your mother, I understand that. She lied to me, about everything. About you, about Gavin, about what she was planning. People make mistakes, Paige. Even good people sometimes make terrible choices. Is that what you think? That Mom is a good person who made mistakes? I considered the question carefully. I think your mother is a complicated person who lost her way. I hope she finds it again. Do you forgive her? I'm working on it. It wasn't entirely true. Forgiveness would take time, maybe years. But anger was exhausting, and I had better things to do with my energy than hate someone who was no longer part of my life. 3 months later, Nessa was disbarred. 6 months after that, she was charged with professional misconduct and fraud. Gavin lost his law license and his marriage. Their planned escape to a new life together never materialized. I kept the house, rebuilt my relationship with Paige, and slowly learned to trust again. The garage became my sanctuary, a place where problems had solutions and honest work produced reliable results. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the man I'd been before the divorce, trusting, complacent, willing to overlook warning signs in favor of comfortable assumptions. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder but more honest, someone who understood that trust was earned, not assumed. I'd learned that marriage was like any other contract. It required good faith from both parties to function. When one party violated that good faith, the contract became void, and the only remedy was dissolution. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted for my marriage, but it was the ending Nessa had chosen. I'd simply made sure she faced the consequences of her choices. The last I heard, she was working as a paralegal in another state, starting over with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that her reputation would follow her wherever she went. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always swift, but it was usually thorough, and sometimes that had to be enough.